Welcome back. A little more relief for motorists is coming next week. The price of petrol going down. Members of the National Assembly have unpacked possible solutions to the alarming prices of fuel. MPs are now considering a report from the Mineral Resources and Energy Committee. The committee has called the fuel increases a matter of national interest. Let's hear some of the possible solutions from Committee Chair Sahlulele Luzipo. A very good morning to you, Mr. Luzipo, and thank you so much for your time. It's more expensive than cooking oil. What is government doing to help us?
Good morning to you, Marina, and your viewers all over. Look, there are quite a number of recommendations that were made by the committee, but you will also recall that at times parliamentary processes, they get overtaken by events. Those recommendations were endorsed by the committee as early as the 1st of April 2022. Amongst other issues that were raised was that we're looking at almost three categories: what we'll call your short-term or your low-hanging fruits. Then there will be, what we'll call your medium-term, and then there's long-term. All of them, they are of quite critical importance because long-term planning is necessary. Amongst those in the short term was the issue of looking at the relocation of the road accident fund, which constitutes almost 30% of the fuel price, was the issue of an immediate complete removal of what we called the freight price. But also there is an issue which we said it also has to be considered that all taxes and levies be moved where they will necessarily belong. For an example, if you look, any increase in fuel prices has got a direct impact on the downstream, even upstream, i.e., if you look at food prices, inflation, your cost of public transport, quite a range of issues will be affected. Your manufacturing sector, your input costs. Again, the issue of fuel price will have a quite a serious negative impact. But in the long term, we said we must look at either revamping or creating a refinery that will be able to assist us in refining, because we buy crude oil, and then we'll be able to refine it. At this stage, we are unable to do that, but it will also assist us in terms of the balance of payment. So those are some of the issues that the report is putting as recommendations.
Mr. Luzipo, whatever happened to the fuel levy exemption? That caused quite a conversation.
Look, like what I'm saying, it's one of the recommendations, but if you remember, I said some of those were even overtaken by events. That tax, that fuel levy exemption, it's still a matter that we think it must be considered and it must be factored in, so that we can at least give some reprieve to the motorists, but also even our manufacturing sectors. But the point, though, is that becomes more of a much shorter exercise. We have to look at mechanisms. If you, for instance, you move the road accident fund, we're not saying you take it out completely. We say relocate it somewhere, because with it as part of the fuel price in the line of scheme of the fuel price increases, it then has a negative impact beyond the issue of road accidents. But also probably you are taxing even wrong people in terms of the levy. Just by virtue of having a generator at home, you must pay road accident fund. Just by virtue of buying petrol, having the use of paraffin, you must also pay road accident fund. While saying let it go where it is necessary, develop mechanisms that will still maintain what is contained in the road accident fund. But where it is located now, it becomes part of what we see as the current problem and the low-hanging fruit that we can deal with in the immediate.
You speak of the exemption being, a temporary solution to some extent. But now South Africans, of course, are hearing that with a lot of things in this country, electricity, food prices and such. So solutions are said to be considered, are said to be discussed by those who are in positions of power, but there are no timelines, So South Africans would actually like to know, when am I going to find myself, if ever, paying maybe 20 rands for a litre of petrol once again? Is it going to be in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? Does government have any idea of when they want to achieve all of these things that they sit in committees discussing?
Look, that is exactly what we said. Remember, when you first lay a foundation, what we say, in order for us to deal with the issue of the fuel hikes, one of the things we said, we must have a comprehensive strategy that talks to one another. For an example, at this stage, as a committee, it will be difficult to say, build a huge refinery by this particular year. We say, start the process of modalities. It may take, maybe say, in 10 years' time, we will have these refineries fully operational, and therefore we can be able to generate reserves. So your long-term solution cannot be seen as if it is less important compared to your immediate, because you are also trying to find a long-lasting solution. That's why we say all these recommendations must not be seen to be talking separately from one another. They must be seen to be talking in complementary, in finding an everlasting solution. And that is precisely why then we say, even if you put the issue of the temporal, or if you put the issue of the levies as a mechanism in terms of exemption, it may not necessarily address the problem of the current crisis of fuel hike as a permanent existing problem. When you look, for an example, if we had huge capacity of consumption as far as the refineries are concerned, the fuel prices or the oil prices were at an all-time low during COVID, and we could have been able to organize as much as we can, put it in our reserves, and when we are faced with challenges of this nature, we can then be able to revert back to our reserves. So we are balancing both the short-term as well as the long-term objectives of what we want to achieve as far as fuel prices are concerned.
Just before we let you go, Mr. Luzipo, last week was the SA Festival of Motoring, and one of the launches that took place at that event was an electric car from one of the major car brands in the world. That is seemingly something that is coming into the South African discourse, at least where motoring is concerned, electric cars. But then there's also the matter of Eskom and the electricity crisis. Can that be a solution perhaps in future, electric cars in this country?
Look, that's why I said, look at all we deal with the totality of the recommendations, amongst others, is what we said, that we must also look at fast-tracking the process of electrification transport. That talks exactly to the electric vehicles. And therefore, the issue of fuel should not only be in the only dependence that we are talking about. We also talk about looking at the biofuels industry, and to what extent can we enhance those particular programs. So yes, the issue of the electrification transport is one of the things that we think they can be able to mitigate against the challenge. You can imagine, and I'm not saying it is something that will happen tomorrow, but you can imagine if the majority of our public transport, particularly your taxi industry, you were to have electrification vehicles, then it actually means that we can be able to cap but also address the issue of low carbon emissions. So it's either way. But yes, again, you are correct. We also have to address the issue of the energy crisis that we are faced with. That includes Eskom in particular. And we should not see resolving the issue of fuel prices outside the issue of the crisis of electricity. In fact, those are the two major issues that have got a serious negative impact in our economy.
Most definitely. Mr. Luzipo, thank you so much for joining us here on the South African Morning. That is Chairperson of Parliament's Mineral Resources and Energy Committee, Sahlulele Luzipo.